blah, 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 blah.
Welcome to the Our Forever Smiles podcast, a podcast created to support mothers of children who were born with clefts and those who love them. I'm your host, Laura Arroyo, and I'm also a mother of a daughter who was born with a surprise cleft palate. I know the challenges you face every day, whether you have just learned the difficult news of your baby's cleft lip or palate, you're in the midst of pre-op or post-op, or you're an OG cleft mom. This podcast is for you. In a weekly conversation, we will talk about everything from feeding and speech therapy to surgery and school. We'll share tips from guest experts and advocates and even share a little joy in the process. You can listen to Our Forever Smiles wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. Hello, and welcome back to the Our Forever Smiles Cleft Mom Diaries and Support podcast. I am your host, Laura Arroyo. Before we jump into this episode, I would like to invite you to join this community to hear conversations with other cleft moms and advocates that will help you feel supported along your journey. All I want you to do is click on the follow or subscribe button. I love your support. It's incredible just to see us all come together, and we're just getting started here. I can't wait for you all to see what we have in store. So thank you so much for subscribing. As a note, we are not medical doctors, and we do not intend for you to use this information that we share here as medical advice. We are parents and advocates who love our children, and we're just sharing our own personal experiences. So, in big news this week, I'm not quite sure when this episode will air, but I officially announced the release date for this podcast, and I've just been so thrilled about the response from everyone. Of course, my family and friends are really thrilled, but just more importantly, the cleft community has been so receptive of just the work that we've been doing here, sharing our stories and just various perspectives. So just before I started this journey to create this podcast, I vowed to just be inclusive of all of our experiences. So whether that came from doctors, mothers, grandparents, and of course, cleft affected individuals, we have to hear from those that are impacted by all of this the most. But I also vowed to just provide you with all of the joy and offer you peace and reassurance. So today we have one of the most beautiful guests I feel like that I've had. Beauty is an understatement, honestly. And I know this is an audio podcast, but I was very tempted to tell Steph to prepare to be camera ready just so that you all could see her. But Steph is more than just a beauty. She's a director of growth in the medical aesthetics industry. She previously was an executive in the fashion industry and has done all of this while being a proud cleft advocate. She spreads awareness along her fitness journey. She has over 570,000 followers on TikTok. Welcome, Steph.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. So I would like to dive into your background a little bit. Where are you originally from?
I'm kind of a mutt. I was born in Nashville, but I grew up in Northern Virginia. But my parents are from Wisconsin, and I lived in New York for 14 years, and now I'm in Florida.
What's your favorite place to be?
Well, I'm going to say Florida because I just got here and the sun feels really good while it's freezing everywhere else. So I'm feeling good about the future and the sunshine.
Yeah, I can imagine. Fun fact, I'm also from Virginia. So
Oh.
I love Virginia. I'm a Virginia girl.
Yeah.
So you were born in Nashville,
Yeah.
right? Okay. And I guess Steph is a cleft affected individual. Were you lip and also palate affected?
Yeah, I am both. So I was born with a bilateral cleft lip and cleft palate. I think that one thing that I was really lucky with, and that one thing that a lot of parents have to face, is I was just blessed with the most amazing surgeon. I never really knew. It's interesting because as I've gotten more involved in the Black community, I've been having to forcefully pull things out of my parents because they didn't tell me a lot of things as a kid because they didn't want me to feel like a burden or carry that as my sole identity. Because as a kid, bullying and things like that, it was something I was really trying to separate from. But now that I'm really embracing it, I've had to get them to pull out the real for me. And I was really a miracle baby in some regard, I would say. My parents didn't know before I was born. I'm 36. So in 1987, you couldn't see it in ultrasound. My sister was born 3 years later, and they could tell that she was not cleft affected. No one in my been affected before. And essentially, I came out and they didn't even know what my gender was. But my dad says that before even announcing my gender, they announced that I was cleft affected, and my dad didn't even know what that was. And I think it just kind of started from there. So the biggest things that it impacted, which I'm sure a lot of parents listening to this podcast are dealing with, was the feeding and the breathing. At that time, there weren't enough moms that were vocal about their choices around breastfeeding. And now, being in Nashville, my mom had a lot of shame because I needed to hit a certain weight in order to get that surgery that I needed to be able to properly eat and breathe because of the palate, which is not visible. It's not what we get bullied about as we grow up, but it's so essential for life. And it's so essential for the eating and breathing. And it's the surgery that is the most expensive for parents with, depending on the insurance coverage. And it's the area that causes a ton of reconstruction. My mom still tried to breastfeed me. Actually, her doctor had to physically tell her, you must stop trying, stop. But my dad would feed to me and was in the cancer unit. And so I didn't know that actually until a few months ago. So like I said, my parents have hid all these things from me, but you can see in pictures when I was going through my baby book, you can see that I was born super happy. So I think that gave my parents a lot of reassurance. And being in that unit initially gave my parents the comparison. They were just so grateful, so it was a completely different perspective. And the other thing is, even though I was there, fast forwarding, I've only had 3 reconstruction surgeries, and many face so many more than that. So I really am a corn case when it comes to that. And I know that. And I guess my mom says, like, the nurses, I was such a bubbly baby. And so it gave them a lot of reassurance, but that also the nurses would come in and almost do their breaks in there and, just we want to be here because we know we can help her. And in this unit, we can't help everyone. And that was just a huge impact on my parents. We're so lucky. And so can you imagine that just giving you a completely different perspective than what some of these other parents might journey? It's just, you don't get the harsh comparison right there. But really, after my first year of life, everything really changed. It's weird because my surgery when I was 3 years old is my first memory waking up from surgery, which happens to a lot of people if you have surgery young. So I remember waking up and getting sick. And then I remember eating nothing but Honey Nut Cheerios, and I can't even look at the freaking box to this day because it's like, I can't. It was
like a food aversion.
And but at the time I was super blessed with my doctor, like I said, and there was a guy that he was so my parents, I did my first 2 surgeries in Nashville, and then my parents moved to DC, or like Northern Virginia, DC. Super lucky to have a full team at Children's Hospital. If you're able to get a team, it's something they talk about at Smile Trains CleftCon. If you're able to get a team, it's a huge tool. And as a kid, I felt like a celebrity because I would walk in and all my doctors were just, shop in the room, coming in. And every single one of them were fascinated at my surgery results and just telling me that I looked amazing. So I just thought that I was incredible. So it's so funny because it's the perspective of like parents are dying in these things and like holding their breath and hoping that, their kid doesn't feel different or whatever. And I felt it like that at that moment, like I thought it was summer camp. I loved it. I did pick up another pro tip for parents from that, which was, there were a couple parents at CleftCon that if their kid wasn't liking going to those appointments, they would do some ritual after each one of those days, go get a Beanie Baby or whatever. I mean, that makes me sound old, but go get a treat, go get like a fake restaurant or something like that, which then like made it more of a positive experience. So I thought that was a really good shout. But yeah, the guy that then did my third surgery in DC, my family's still in touch with. He also made me feel like a local celebrity, and he like actually was the first one to do lip filler in my lip. When I was in well, yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about your parents' just experience and just like how you're getting more involved in the Cleft community now, and just whether that experience of looking at pictures again or just having to retell you these stories, like, has that impacted them in any way, or has that made them feel emotional or maybe empowered? How has that experience for them been like?
So ironically, so I first started embracing, and I said this, and this made some people tear up, but the first time I hashtagged a Cleft hashtag, that was like a moment. And then like people started using that in Smile Train as like a landmark. Like, here I am, you can find me in this community under this hashtag. So I did my first photo shoot. I lost 50 pounds. You mentioned my fitness, and I was supposed to go to Miami for my birthday in March of 2020. My birthday's March 4th, and I was supposed to go, and then the world basically shut down. So the day before I went into quarantine, I did this photo shoot in New York, like kind of to see myself in how I evolved and like look at myself differently. And then I got the photos while we were quarantining, and it was just ironic because it was a time where I could wear a mask and cover my scars and cover my lip appearance. And I was just like, I'm ready to talk about this now. So I kind of went through this psychological transformation at that time. And that was a different side than my parents were used to and my sister was used to. And I think they had always protected me, right? Like growing up, they did what was right for me. I didn't want anyone to notice. I didn't want anyone to call it out. And so they always ran interference as far as making sure that I had that kind of protection and that bubble built around me. And then when I started talking about it, they were a little nervous to say the wrong thing. Where I want to support you, but they didn't want to ever make it feel like it was an impairment or like that it made me lesser than. And so I think there was a shift there where I was steps ahead and I was like, I'm ready for here. And they were like, hang on a second, like, not stopping me, but they needed to play catch up a little bit. And then I
get that same I get that same feeling sometimes, like even in having conversations with people and even having a cleft affected child. I still, and just for context, my daughter is only palate affected.
Okay.
And so but still, like I find just saying the right thing, even though like I feel a part of this community, but it's not my experience. Right. You know what I mean? Like I'm adjacent to it.
Right.
And so I do like have that feeling sometimes of, oh, like, do I have the right to speak on behalf of a community, or am I saying the right things, or how are people going to feel or receive this thing? But yeah, you were going to say something about CleftCon.
Yeah, so I went to CleftCon and I signed up for it, but I didn't really tell my parents. Like I kept mentioning it, but like I didn't flat out say like, you need to be here. I want you here. Right. And then I was lucky that the first one for me was in New York, which I am really grateful that I was able to go back to my own home at the time rather than a hotel. I brought that up because I'm now also on CCAC for Smile Train. And I just can't imagine that first experience it was everything you can imagine as far as like every emotion, like empowering. I filmed a video. I have it pinned at the top of my Instagram, just like the realization when I was getting ready on like, I'm about to be in a room with more cleft affected people than I've ever been in my life. And here I was like thinking I was so confident and I could like rally people on the internet and I could rally someone one-on-one across the table. But I was, wow, like I'm going to be in a room with 200 people that can say me too, or that have it worse than me. And I did like, it was like, I needed to sleep for like 3 days after that. But it was my friend Kelly came with me to that first night, which was kind of the kickoff. And I had at least like a position where I was bringing this makeup brand, Citizen, on board. And they are known for the most inclusive lip makeup line that you can find. They have the most amount of nude shades, 25 shades. So they really try to be, a lot of brands try to be inclusive in skin coloring and in foundations. And they were the first ones that were like, every skin tone needs to be able to be a participant in the nude lip trend without having to layer foundation. So they were lovely enough to donate. And it was so impactful because all these women had been avoiding highlighting their lips. Some of them didn't even know how to use lip liner. So we're showing them, they're crying, they're feeling beautiful. And I was just lucky that I got that like kind of flag to enter and into embrace or interact. And there was like the first hour where if I didn't have my friend Kelly, like there were a couple times where like I looked over at her and like needed the push to like, you're okay. Like get in your zone. You're fine. You're going to be okay. Cause I just felt weirdly like a fish out of water. And I think part of that is because I only had 3 surgeries. I've been super blessed. I was born to 2 parents that at the age of 36 were advocating the 3 of us down on Capitol Hill, and my sister sending flowers the morning before and like FaceTiming in between. Like I've just been super supported even now. And kids, that doesn't even come by everyone that isn't cleft affected. It's a really special situation in itself, but then also the financial component of it. My parents didn't have to battle insurance companies. They were able and willing to pay for whatever I needed. It wasn't a matter of, I was in a room, advocating on Capitol Hill and their kids sitting there where their parents are having to change homes, or the other kids are getting affected because they can't go to any summer camp that their friends are going to because they're having to put money towards medical bills. I did feel a little bit of an imposter syndrome from just being so blessed. So that second day, unlike me, I was really quiet. Like I never raised my hand the second day because I felt like I needed to listen to everyone and I didn't want to talk at anyone. And I wanted to make sure that I was letting the stage for people that had like paved the way in Smile Train to do this. And look, they welcomed me with open arms. It wasn't anything for them. It was all between my ears. Like it was everything I was dealing with. But there is an amount of, I don't know, guilt, I think, in some regard, when some situations, and it's not lost on me. Like that
that's so interesting that you brought that up because I was actually just talking to someone last night. It's another mom and she just found out about it's her son. And she was just talking about how guilty she feels about her son being lip affected and that she wishes it was only palate affected. And I said, well, because I told her about my experience and I said, it's just like what you said earlier, right? It's like, yeah, you could want like just your child to be palate affected because the outer appearance, like your outer appearance isn't affected. And of course you think about everyone thinks about the way that their child's going to look and just like bullying. And that's like a real true concern for some people. But I, I think that what's missed is that people don't realize is that when you're palate affected, you can have true feeding issues and you can
Oh,
have like sinus issues and your ears are impacted and just so many different things. And so it's just like, I have gone through this whole thing, as I've mentioned as well, is like, how do I validate and honor my daughter's experience while she's not, even though she's not lip affected. And I'm talking to this mother who's like, well, I wish that, my son
right,
was only
right.
affected. I'm like, we actually all have it really, excuse my language, we have it really fucking hard. Like it's tough.
Totally.
It's a really
And
tough thing to go through. And so, yeah, I mean, exactly to your point, it's like, how do you feel grateful in some aspects, but in other aspects, that you went through a lot. Your parents went through a lot. That it was a real challenge.
yeah, and
And
I think the darkest thought, just being really honest, after CleftCon was like, I just, again, I think the universe brings everything to you in this moment. And I was posting all online, right? And I was like, it looked to the outer appearance, I was just like at my Super Bowl or something, right?
Right.
And the next day after CleftCon, like, I don't think I moved. Like, I just like sat on the couch and probably just cried. And one of my friends texted me and was like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I just feel like you're shining and you're coming into your own. And I was like, you don't know how much I needed that. It's because my darkest moment after CleftCon was thinking about passing this on, knowing my situation to a kid. So that's something that I have to deal with, like, and that I have grappled with. And I like just have to be lucky that if I'm meant to be a mother, like and that is what I'm dealt with, I will deal with that. But just the fact that like my parents didn't know, there was nothing, there was no signs of that. And like, I know what I would be signing someone else up for. So for me, the guilt, even without it being an option in this moment, is like, am I making this decision for someone else? And I think we all have some of that, but
yeah,
that was just being transparent. That was probably the darkest moment for me but, I would just have to lead by example and like
yeah,
let that pass through.
yeah. Well, I mean, if it gives you any reassurance, we did all the testing before. I had no idea because she's only palate affected. My daughter, well, I didn't know until she was born. I had no
Right.
idea. So
And
I was,
and they say they
in
can
the same.
see the lip through the sonogram, but then if they see the lip, then they say, oh, 80% chance you have both. But yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
if you don't see that, you don't.
Yeah. And we did everything right, right? Like we did everything that was in our power. I couldn't have bet that this was going to happen to me at all. But like, like, I think that's the one thing to grapple with is that you won't know, right? Like you
Right.
will never know until you decide to, make that decision to start your own family.
Yeah.
But just in thinking about your own childhood,
Mm.
you mentioned that when you were 3, you remember waking up from
Yeah.
a surgery at some point. But when did you realize that you were different from others?
I mean, so what's weird is that I know that there was a kid in my kindergarten class that had it, but we didn't talk about it really with one another, but we could recognize it on each other. It probably was the 3rd grade. I was starting to get bullied in the 3rd grade, but it gets tough, just as a heads up to parents. So when I look at my pictures from when I was like a 7 or 8-year-old kid, like I still felt like, oh my gosh, I looked like a little kid model. I look at those pictures and I'm like, wow, like, but as I went through puberty early and I just noticed, I brought this up with a group and everyone started agreeing, like, as kids go through puberty and their skin starts to stretch and everything starts to change, your scars do become more enhanced. And so
Mm.
that time I was like way more developed than every girl in my grade. I was like, what is going on with my body? And then on top of it, my scars were becoming like quite red.
Mm.
And so I was like, that was just the icing on the cake kind of. But I guess I was not surprised, but I was super vocal with my mom. And
Mhm.
I did a cosmetic outpatient surgery in the 8th grade because my scars were bothering me so much. And I went to my plastic that did my 3rd surgery, and he was like, okay, let's do 2 things on your lip. Then this totally changed my lip. I've never heard of anyone else doing this. So I try to like sound it out so that parents can look into it. But get this thing called a VY split on my upper lip, which they do, I guess, in breast augmentations, where you split the skin like a V. You even it out because a lot of us lack symmetry on our lips. And that's what, like, especially in photos, that's what we see. Um, and so they try to even out each side as much as possible. And then they sew it back up like a Y. So that's why it's called a VY split. So he did that. And then he did a really, really tough laser on my scars. Now technology's so much more advanced. It wouldn't be, but I had the Band-Aid for a really long time. And he said,
Mhm.
you get way worse before it gets better, but you're in the 8th grade. You have 2 boys in your class. I was in a really small private school. Do this before high school, do this before college, do this before you're applying for college. Like, he really pushed me kind of like as another father figure. And he was so right. You can see my scars change over the next 3 years, and it just was like a game changer for me. So I also, if your kid is expressing in that time that they're, changing, I would recommend looking into any lasers for the scars, because the earlier you catch them, that's the tough part, is that like you probably as a parent, you feel weird doing something like that at
Mhm.
age, but the more that you can affect things at a younger age when the skin isn't as old, the better result you're going to garner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with any of this stuff, it's the early intervention is really critical.
Really
And I can see how that can feel, I don't
shallow
know, I
or
guess
like
like
vein.
cosmetic-y,
Yeah.
like, yeah, or I mean, I'm all for a little nip and tuck here, but I'm obviously because it's my daughter, I'm thinking like I would probably feel that way, like, well, do I want to
Oh, I was like, shoving it down my,
put
like,
her
my
through
mom had no
that?
choice. Like, she literally had no choice. So that's the other, no one would ever accuse my mom of coming up with any idea. I was researching everything, figuring out everything, making appointments and dragging her there. And she's like, what's going on? So
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm wondering, I mean, just for your surgeon to have this type of like insight, I know what would fix that. I think sometimes our Cleft teams, some of them are really competent, not to say that they're incompetent, but some of them are just really like well versed in these types of things and they can offer a service like that. And I think that it's so important for moms and parents to ask those types of questions. Like what are alternative things that we can do to kind of help with scarring or kind of help with the appearance of
Yeah.
of the lip and early intervention is really really
Or
really
like
important.
if your kid vocalizes that that is bothering them, like even not to do with my cleft, but even when I struggle with my weight, my mom would be like, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? And so she would put the ball in my court, and I would be like, I want a trainer. I want a nutritionist. I want, so then she would let me ask for whatever tool I wanted. She didn't put anything in my head. She let me come up to the table with the solution. And she had, she was a strong working woman and could finance that, luckily. But that way, these were my thoughts and my desire.
Yeah.
So she then, but yeah, I mean, just knowing having those tools in your toolkit. I mean, now with all my passions on finding the solutions for all of that, I ironically work in medical aesthetics. And there's a lot of stuff that's coming out that's on the brink of things in this community. Like I don't even know if this is nationwide yet, but I had a mom contact me and she had a really rough road. Luckily, I believe her daughter's at the hospital now, but they were in there for months. And she was born in September, and she told me in Colorado she had access to stem cell banks for free because her daughter was cleft affected. And that's a huge game changer in this community. And there needs to be people need to be educating about stem cells. But now in aesthetics, we've just literally within months ago have launched, exosomes, which are a topical treatment. And that could be another thing that you could do along with a laser to treat. And that cell regeneration and turnover is supposed to be like the best thing that you can possibly do. So I'm also excited to kind of harness some of my job into another passion and kind of see what other solutions to come up with for this community.
Yeah, I mean, I was blown away because I've never seen that perspective of just incorporating, like for the girls, right? Like be a cutie into your cleft journey and just like making it, empowering and just all the things, right? And so how did you like get into the beauty industry?
Yeah. So I worked in fashion for 14 years. So I would say it's kind of adjacent. And then I think that I just have always been on this insane pursuit for like what's within my control or within my finances to make me more confident about my clef and make me so essentially bullying doesn't hurt if you don't believe it, right? So if girls and you and you believe what they're saying, it hurts. But if you feel amazing, it doesn't hurt. Or it's like, wow, that is really a you problem and that's not a me problem. It's just you can handle it differently. I'm not saying it doesn't hurt. It's also who made you to be doing that. Yeah. But so I have always been on the pursuit for that. Like, truthfully, it sounds crazy to say it because it has word teen in it. But the first time I filled my lip, I was 19, I was in college and I was like pushing my mom. I want to do surgery. I want to do something. I want to be like Goldie Hawn from First Wives Club. And my mom was like, please, let's just make an appointment with her French. Like, let's let him tell us what we're doing. And he was like, I'm not doing that. And let's try filling your lip. It's not permanent. You're a perfectionist. You're going to be whatever. And by the way, back in that day, there was no numbing. So it was the most painful thing you can possibly imagine. And the work wasn't great because you were in such pain while they were doing it. But yeah, so I just have always loved finding a solution, right? And so I think from that, I'm a research nerd. I love hacks. I love efficiency. I love proving people wrong. There's also like, people are like, you've gotten work done. Yeah. And like,
Yeah.
it's like where, you know, what's the shame in feeling good about the way you look? Like what's the problem with loving yourself? What's the problem with looking in the mirror and feeling great? Like, I'm not understanding that. Like, me spending my money on the way I look is a problem for you. That is so silly. So yeah, I think I coin it my cleft confidence, but I just was in this pursuit to kind of harness that. And then along the way, I met my boss now who did all this correction for me. My before and after photos were crazy. And he's someone, after CleftCon, actually, I went to him. I wasn't working for him yet. This is kind of how the conversation started for me to start working with him. But I went to him after hours And I was in a room full of 200 people that were told this is as good as it gets. And I was really pissed off. And he was, it's not true. It's not true. Like, there are more solutions. And, that started the conversation of me coming to work for him. But that is part of my reason,
Yeah.
passionate about it, because I can see it. I can see also people in surgery, like, it's just so traumatic. Like, how many surgeries some of these people, kids, everyone has gone through, and they don't want to do it again if it's not going to give them a promise of fulfilling. And so being able to go get a liquid nose job that then evens out your cleft nose for a tenth of the price, I would,
Yeah.
if that's
Yeah.
what you want, if that's what you want. It's not, I'm definitely not forcing anything on anyone, and it's not for everyone. But if it bothers you and you are looking for a solution for it, there are more affordable, accessible, less traumatic from a downtime standpoint solutions.
Yeah, of course. You mentioned just having to also go through painful or procedures that weren't necessarily the most easy to endure. What do you think was your worst surgery or your worst procedure?
I mean, I don't remember a lot, because I was so young when I did those first few surgeries. I think that recovering from the VY split and the laser was, but then I did have a doctor that took advantage of me because he knew that I wanted to get rid of my scars so bad. And I was doing this Fraxel laser on my scars, and the first 3, they say you should do 3. That's kind of like the magic number. Skin lasers, resurfacing, you should do always a series of 3. And then you should take a year off. And then if needed, then you do another series of 3. Well, this doctor let me do 12 or more, maybe. And I paid myself for them. After the 5th one, I think I was bleeding and pussing because my skin was so just not. And my boss now, when he found out that, was like, oh my God, that's just unethical. But those lasers were really painful. They didn't the pain doesn't last long. They're so quick, especially because you're just doing your tiny scars. But that probably was brutal. And then I think just some of the recovery is a little traumatic sometimes. I've done lasers on my eyes or things like that, and it's not as big of a deal. But when you do it on your cleft scars, and if it's you're oh my God, did I make myself worse? And I don't know, it's that area or the night before, it's just you have different anxiety because it's just a trauma spot.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that. What are cleft affected people's usual concerns? Or I guess maybe what was your main concern? I know the scars were a concern for you, but anything in your nose, and I guess what would be your recommendation outside of what you've mentioned for someone?
So my boss also, during my interview process, so after CleftCon, I started getting obsessed with watching people in person and then seeing them on screen. And I was wow, how they say the camera ends 10 pounds? Well, I was looking at pictures and looking at people in real life at events, things like that. And I was they don't look anything like that. And it's a different thing though, when you have a cleft and then you take a picture and you see it and it's the back camera or whatever. And you're oh my God, my lip looks droopy, or it I look sad and I'm smiling. I think that's the thing that looks sometimes like a sad face. And so I remember I was at this event and I took this picture and it looked like I was Harry Potter with a lightning bolt on my forehead. And I was I do not have that. And I was seeing a girl she looked like America's Next Top Model, and she didn't look great in the photo. And I was this is people need to know this, that this is, and I was explaining this to my boss now, and he sent me this video, super powerful video, just showing how the same camera, the same person standing in the same place, but with lens depth and everything can look so different. And you could like fluctuate rounds or things like that. And so I do think it's important for people to breathe easy on like just the way people stress their weight in photos or angles or things like that. I will tell you, after being in a room of 200 cleft affected people, that it never looks as bad in person as it does sometimes in video and in picture. Like it's just accentuated. And I think it's important to like, for people to know that, because like you'd rather look better in person, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that was a reality for me, I guess, along the way.
Yeah. And any like, I guess like procedures that you would recommend?
Oh yeah.
Or
So I
I
do.
know we spoke a little bit about fillers as well.
Yeah. I would definitely say the laser is a big game changer. I would also say that now there's amazing makeup, but I will say that growing up, like I would never even dream of going to the mailbox without like makeup lathered on. And if you see pictures from me from high school, like my skin above my lip looks like a different color because I was wearing such thick, like funeral makeup over my lip, whereas the rest of my face was, tan. Now I feel pretty good about my results from the lasers that I will be out with that. So I would say like microneedling, Genius RF skin resurfacing treatments. Those aren't fillers. That's not injectables. That's super, super good. And then using the exosomes. I haven't been able to try exosomes yet, but it's totally on my wish list. And then just partnering with your doctor early on those reconstruction options. And I think should people want to adventure, if someone had a strong cleft affected voice and they were really adventurous or fearless, there probably soon on the horizon will be someone that would be willing to inject in the palate to help that speech.
Yeah.
So
That's a big concern for me with my daughter is definitely speech. And I want to do everything that I can to help her. So that's amazing that that's something that is like maybe an option.
yeah.
For
Yeah.
her.
I mean, I was going to say like my number one tip for parents would be speech therapy. And it's something that I've even thought about doing again. I clear my nose because of my palate. I would also say that part of my fitness journey has like really been because of my cleft, but because of my cleft and my breathing, I hated running. I hated the like rush it gave down my throat and into my chest. And now being able to like, I literally have changed my cardiovascular system. I couldn't even run one lap around the track. Like it was just
Wow.
wild. I played sports, but I did not have the endurance that other people did. And now I wake up and I work out every day. And so I
Yeah.
that movement of some kind, like I think also I was swimming a lot and practicing like blowing bubbles with your nose and things like that. Like as a little kid, that's a good practice, but the speech therapy is huge. And so many parents are doing that now for kids that aren't even cleft affected, but it is something that I've even thought about now because sometimes I stutter or I feel like I have a speech impediment when I have anxiety. I feel like it kicks up a little bit more. I guess it's a benefit to moving to Florida because I'm driving in my car so I can sing along to songs. But I felt like when I lived in New York and I wasn't like, singing to the radio, I was like, I'm hearing myself stutter a lot. So yeah, but I think speech therapy is a huge, powerful tool that parents can utilize to offset some of that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to also talk about your TikTok and just sharing like you share a lot about your fitness journey
Mhm.
and of course, your Cleft journey as well, and just addressing, I saw today, addressing some of the haters
Oh,
as
yeah.
well. I love that. I feel like, oh my goodness, like, yes. And then just the way that you address it, you just have so much confidence, and I know that you've had to like build that over time, that's not something that you probably just came to have like overnight. And so I just, love watching your videos. I also, so after having my baby, I lost 50 pounds as well.
That's
I was like out
amazing.
of control, but yeah. And so that was like a really big thing for me. And so I've also followed a lot of tips there for fitness as well. But like, just in thinking about along the lines of how you eventually grew up to be this, super confident woman, what is something that you wish that people knew about cleft children, or cleft lip and palate in general? Or like, what is some advice you would give to cleft mom?
Well, first, I would lead with the speech therapy. Second, I would say my parents did absolutely everything that I wanted. Like they operated to my wants, but sometimes kids don't know their needs.
Mm.
So I probably should have been in therapy, although that wasn't a thing when I was like super young at that age. It really wasn't until I was probably in college did that start becoming more of a thing that was socially acceptable. But, or, and now today, like heavily encouraged and embraced. But I probably should have been talking to someone. So
Yeah.
just if my parents had pushed me on the subject, I would have thought there was something wrong with me. So I
Mhm.
do commend them for not doing that, especially with the juxtaposition of my sister not having one and being super beautiful and being an all-star athlete and like not having, she looked babe and I was struggling with my weight. I'm glad that they didn't push the subject more with me because I think it would have led to bigger problems. So that was the right move on their part, but I probably should have had an outlet just indirectly that could ask me about things or if it bothers me or things like that. But I don't know. It would have had to be the right person because I'm sure I would have been defensive on it at first. But I would encourage parents to tell kids that this is their superpower. Like they are
Mm.
so lucky. They're so beautiful. They were chosen for this. And just like people with clefts are kinder and you see the world differently. You make friends differently. You have empathy differently. And I think just kind of empowering it as like your superpower, I think is how, if I had a daughter that was cleft affected, that's how I would address it. Like, this is your superpower.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
you're going to fight the bullies off with your superpower, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that that's what I would just suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that. And so just in everything, that we've discovered today or discussed today, and I love that you talk about your experience at ClefCon, because I've looked at the videos and stuff and even never realized that you were, I guess feeling overwhelmed in the moment, right? But I wanted to ask, and just your entire journey and everything that you've gone through, and all of the accomplishments that you've achieved. What's the biggest lesson you've learned in all of this?
I think that probably it's something centered around handling the outside noise. Um,
Mm.
because there's a lot of it and it doesn't stop as an adult. If you want to see that, you can check out my TikTok page and look through the comments, but it's vile, vile. So
Yeah.
if you want to know who's raising those bullies that are mean to your kids on the playground, they're on my page. But I just think embracing it and not, if you look at some of the most successful businesses, the most successful concepts out there, they basically use something that was I don't want to use the word handicap, but like that was something that they felt vulnerable or exposed, or they felt lesser than for. That's the better way to describe it. And they flipped the script on it. And like, so wrong, right, indifferent, love them or hate them. Kim Kardashian is a very, very smart businesswoman, and they have built this huge empire. And here she was walking on all the carpets initially as this different, unpopular body type once upon a time, and had all this shapewear and all this stuff and cut, and the colors weren't right and all of this. And now she has Skims, this huge empire, and who's laughing now? And by the way, also now everyone's taking her photos to their trying to get her body, right? So it's, you can take what is in your mind, your weakness, or what you feel like is your pain point. That's the way to say it, is your pain point, and just find a way to capitalize and flip the script on it. And that's kind of what I've done with Cleft. I've just decided, like, okay, instead of crying, and letting them win and letting them affect me, I'm going to make a destination so that kids can see that you can be successful, or you can be, you can be anything you want. And that's also why I really embrace the beauty component, because I would love to see, for kids to look at campaigns and see a cleft face in the same sentence as beauty and beautiful. And I just think that will be a really, really powerful moment, just those videos that they had me bawling of, like, when the newer version of Ariel came out, and all these Black moms were filming their daughters, and it was just the fact that they felt seen, and it just was, oh my God, that my heart. And I just imagine that feeling being somewhat similar, like feeling, oh, I'm accepted, or I'm allowed, or I'm beautiful too, or I could do that, and feeling included.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Well, Steph, you are certainly, I feel, a role model in this community. And I just want to thank you so much for, this conversation today. I think that it's much needed within this community. I think it's honest, and, it's a perspective that I feel like people are really, really looking for. So thank you. And thank you all for listening to the Our Forever Smiles, Cleft Mom Diaries, and Support podcast. Be sure to subscribe and submit a review of the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I hope that you've enjoyed this audio experience. Maybe you cried a little, laughed a little, but more importantly, I hope that you feel a little piece of reassurance and even joy in your journey. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye.